Welcome, Ron.
Thank you, Ray. I'm going to take a little change in uh, the way things have been going this morning. This podium seems to be lonely over here, so I'm going to hide behind it the best I can. So I'd like to share with you this morning about how my operation has evolved in the last 35 or 45 years, however you want to start counting, as a hay producer growing up in north central Illinois. I called it the Golden Triangle. It's between interstates 55, 39, and 80, about 85 miles southwest Chicago. Grew up on a family farm, um, milking about 100 cows. Uh, Before I go too far, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that my Sandy is with me today, and she's responsible for a lot of the audio and video uh, progress in this. So um, I did get started relatively early. They didn't let me start driving a tractor till I was 5, and it seems like I've been driving something ever since. Started in the hay business actually in '83, but prior to that, like I say, growing up on a dairy farm, making quality hay was always a priority. Been involved in the National Hay Association and the American Forage and Grassland Council, the National Forage Testing Association. At times I wonder why I can't even keep a job like that. Um, but growing up in north central Illinois, corn is king. The 5 counties right around where I grew up in Livingston County, Livingston, LaSalle, McLean, Woodford, and Ford counties, it's been reported that those 5 counties grow more corn than the state of Missouri. So it's sort of to see a hayfield up in that area is sort of an anomaly. We started out milking 100 cows. There was my 2 brothers, my father, and a full-time hired man. And my first memories are making small square bales. And I apologize, but if you think back 35 to 45 years ago, we didn't have cameras on our cell phones. I mean, what was a cell phone then? So I don't have very many pictures of how things progressed since then. Um, but anyway, my first memories are small square bales. In 1965, we bought a New Holland 271 baler with a bale thrower on it to eliminate a lot of the labor. My brother could bale the hay in the field. My job was to haul it to the barn, help unload it, and then keep running the tractor back and forth. We didn't we didn't stack the hay in the mow. We had chutes where we could drop it down into the feeders for the cattle. So we just dumped it into the mow. It's the same as we put it into the basket wagons in the field. In 1973, we changed over to a big round baler. This saved a lot of labor, as a lot of you probably realize. In our dairy operation, we were able to get the hay off faster, and also to augment the expense of the baler. We were able to do some custom work for neighbors and move them along as well. 1976 brought another change to our operation. We were approached by New Holland to be a New Holland dealer. At that time, we owned 13 pieces of New Holland equipment, all everything from a combine to obviously a small square baler, big round baler, manure spreader, skid loader, grinder mixer, hay conveyor, wagons, etc. So it was a new experience for us, not having a machinery dealership business side background, but we progressed from there. In 1977, we sold our dairy herd, and it was sort of tough on my dad because he'd grown up with the dairy herd, and the big change of having 100 dairy cows around the buildings to having nothing around was critical for him. In '83, I bought a new New Holland 326 square baler, wire tie. If some of you can think back to, yeah, there actually were wire tie balers, and this was before twine or plastic twine really came onto the market. And after I ran that a year and started having more problems sourcing the wire for the baler, we changed that out, took the knotter stack off, took the twister stack off, put the knotter stack on, and had to change the needles too, of course, because they're different. Along with that that baler, I bought a pull-tie bale wagon, and that was really, you didn't have to handle it. If the bales would pick up with the bale wagon, put them in the shed. The only couple issues we had were that I was spaced out enough. Some of the hay fields were 8 to 10 miles from where the storage shed was. After my first cutting, I had an individual contact me. He wanted to buy that pull-type bale wagon. So I jumped at the opportunity to sell it and bought a self-propelled bale wagon where I could haul 160 bales versus 104. And it's really a thrill when you're going down the highway and you start passing cars with that thing, going 50, 55 mile an hour. You do it empty, you don't do it loaded, but you know, of course, when you're at that age and ambitious and indestructible, you can do about anything. So that system worked pretty well with the bale wagon. Excuse me, until 1988, and the bale wagon was in an accident with a train. Obviously, the bale wagon was beyond repair, so we switched over to a farmhand accumulator to pull behind the baler, and that worked fairly well, except the farmhand accumulator held 8 bales, and but it didn't have quite the capacity and didn't move quite quick enough to keep up with the capacity that the baler had. But we were able to load the trucks, one man on the tractor, one man on the truck, and put the bales in place. And a good tractor operator could save a lot of time for the guys actually putting the bales in place. But then at the end of the first year, I switched over to a Holscher accumulator, which handled 10 bales on edge, and that made the baler work a whole lot better. So it worked out good. At that time, in 1988, also, I was contacted by a friend of ours in Wisconsin that ran a feed store up there, and he had about 275 customers on his feed list. And they had just gone through a drought. We were in the process, it seems like from the 1st of November to the 1st of April, we were hauling 5 to 6 loads of small square bales a week to Wisconsin. Now, you think about what kind of exercise you get. We're usually starting load by 7 o'clock in the morning, takes 2 hours to load, drive 4 hours, takes 2 hours to unload, drive 4 hours home. And you're doing that 5 to 6 days a week. I mean, I was in pretty good shape then. And then, I'd played some college sports, but I think I was in better shape then than at the time. In 1991, I started hearing about the mid-sized square balers. And I found a source up in Reedsville, Wisconsin that was baling hay and had excess hay he wanted to sell. As it turned out, doing a little more research, I ran across a customer that was looking for a large quantity of hay in western Kentucky, over around Kirksey, Stella. I'm sure a lot of you know where that's at, south of Paducah, a little ways. So we were hauling big square bales from Wisconsin to western Kentucky on a regular basis, and working out real well. Well, I liked it so well in 91 that I bought one of those balers in 92, and figured that, well, if I could bale 3,000 bales with that a year, or going back to some of the numbers that the earlier gentleman was going through, that we'd probably be in pretty good shape. Well, the first year we baled 5,000 bales. So we were on our way, and things were working pretty good. In 1994 is what I call my gold standard. My father passed away in March of 94, and I had 640 acres of hay. I had 2 hired men. And we started in, did first cutting, which usually is your biggest crop. Usually 40% of your hay comes off in your first cutting. It took us 10 days from the time we started mowing first cutting till we got it all done. And all I had left, darn it, was a stack of checks. Everything got baled, loaded, and shipped right out of the field. We had some commercial trucks come in and haul for us, but that's what I've always tried to attain to get back to. And that hay, the first cutting hay, was running about 22% protein and 175 relative feed value. So it wasn't like we were making junk. We were making some pretty good hay, and it all went to, it went between a feedlot in northern Illinois that wanted some good hay, and a couple dairies down in the Effingham area, southern Illinois. At that time, I still had the round baler, and the small square baler, and the big square baler. I was limited on tractors, so I decided to get rid of a couple of the balers. But before I did that, I did try some of the baleage, and I see there was a presentation later today that will discuss that. But in 1991, 92, there wasn't nearly as much knowledge about baleage as what we have today. And it was a really good operation to get the hay off the ground, out of the field, eliminate a lot of the weather risk. But for the dry hay market that I was trying to work with and expand that market, it wasn't as viable as it would be today. 1998, we switched over to a 3x3 baler. They were a little easier to handle than the 2x3. They're a little bit heavier bale, could max out the truck. And I've always been a proponent of having an accumulator, so you save the traffic in the field. The operator can dump the bales wherever he wants to and sort of group them in the field. He can dump 1, 2, 3 bales, it doesn't matter. The object is to group them closer together instead of grouping 4 bales. I mean, because usually you're going to handle 3 at a time anyway, so you got an odd number. So it's not a matter of having to dump 4 bales, it's a matter of grouping the bales to save traffic in the rest of the field. So you don't have to go to the far end of the field to get that done. We're able to handle the bales a lot easier and still in an efficient manner. And if you see there, we've got pallets on the floor. It's a dirt floor there, and currently today my hay shed's got a concrete floor, and we still put pallets down below that. You know, there is an occasional leak where some water will come in, but also it gives me another avenue for airflow underneath the hay to help dry it out in case we have some that didn't get quite as dry as it should have been. In 2003, I was offered 2,000 acres of wheat straw. And at that time, I was president of the American Forage and Grassland Council, and the timing is going to work out that I was going to be gone during the wheat harvest. So I was contacted by a custom operator out of Colorado who came in with a 4x4 baler and baled the wheat straw for me. And we transported it to a local mushroom farm, which is 50 miles away. And it worked out so well that I ended up buying a baler to do the 2004 crop myself. But I never baled hay with the 4x4 because it did not have preservative applicator on it. I only baled the hay with the 3x3. And the straw market, the straw enterprise was evolved because we had some of the equipment that we needed that we used in hay. Could still use some of that in straw. But we expanded the straw market a little bit faster than we did with the hay. At the time, we were doing about 300 acres of hay between my dad and I. And at our peak, we were up between 5,000 and 6,000 acres of wheat straw. And some of that was a little ways away, but we were able to get it done. And in the peak, we were running three swathers. Just like we got 3 swathers because a lot of the combines were just cutting the heads off, and the mushroom farm wants longer straw. So we'd come back through the swather and clip that all the way down to the ground to get that off. You see there a load of straw that's ready to go. And the question came up, of course, what the heck is a little bale? But anyway, we'd run 3 swathers, 3 balers, 2 loader tractors, and we had about 8 trucks hauling the straw where we're baling and shipping 20 to 25 loads of straw a day, excuse me. In 2007, our system changed a little bit. As was referred to earlier, the Easter freeze of 07 got a lot of our wheat as well. So in that regard, the mushroom farm was sourcing their straw out of Kansas and hauling it out themselves. So that market started to dwindle down, and they were still buying some straw locally, but most of it was coming from a distance away. In 2010, I changed the 3x3 to 3x4s. It gave us a little better package for baling straw, or we could max out a load of, or excuse me, not max out, but get 20 to 22 tons of straw in a truck. And of course, the hay was never an issue to get enough weight on to make it profitable. The last 2 years, I've started baling more corn stalks. I expected that this winter that we're into now, that straw was going to be desperately short, which it has been. I'm selling some straw now for the same or more dollars than I've been selling some hay, just because a lot of it has transportation costs involved with it. But the corn stalks have worked fairly well in the last 2 years. Again, we're using some equipment that we had on hand. Some of my own corn stalks are baled behind a chopping corn head. And then some other is done with, go out with a batwing mower and chop the stalks that way. I didn't quite get to the extent that this gentleman did, and this was taken up in Emmitsburg, Iowa, up at the Poet project that they have up there, where they're wanting to bale somewhere around 10, 15,000 acres of stalks. As you see there, they've got a square baler attached to the back of the combine. They take the chopper, and instead of having it be a spreader, they convert it so it blows right into the top of, actually they take the pickup off and it blows in above where the pickup is to run the baler, and they power that with hydraulics from the combine. So it's a pretty slick system if you want to spend the time and money to do it. Ever since we've started mowing, making hay, I've had a New Holland haybine, and this is the current machine that I've got. It happens to be an 06 model, but it still runs. It's a 15-foot disc bine. Excuse me. As you see there, we've got a little bit of a gap between the two windrows. And the reason that is you come back through with a twin rake, so I put those two windrows together, and I leave enough room so I can drive between the windrows and not drive on the windrows. It frustrates me when I go to a field day or something and they're having some mowing demonstrations and somebody's out there with a tractor on 30-inch spacing, and they're running right down the middle of the windrow to demonstrate their mowing machine. Now, I understand that they're not probably selling as much hay equipment as they could be, but we go to great lengths not to drive over the windrow at all. Obviously, the headlands are an issue we can't get around, but down through the field, you don't do that. As you can see, there's a little more spacing in between the windrows so you get better drying. Then we come back through and rake that with, as I said, a twin rake, putting the two windrows. Ideally, we put the twin rows side by side. And if you've made much hay, you know that your windrow shape or form can be adjusted a lot by your speed and how you operate the rake. So we try to minimize actually putting the windrows on top of each other. Ideally, we like to put them side by side so the air will still flow through and get continued drying. The final portion of my presentation is to talk a little bit about marketing. And yeah, I mean, this is sort of an obscene picture. Why would you run around with a semi with just one bale on it? But sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And then there's other ways of marketing. Just throw a round bale in the back of a pickup truck and go where you got to go. When we first started making the 3x4 bales, this is how we were loading the truck. I mean, it looks nice. The only problem was it's very inefficient to load and unload, because you see you got the 9 bales up on the deck, but everything behind that is crossways. So it takes so much longer to unload than the way we're doing now. And we'd like to do a little better job than what this gentleman does, because tying it on the truck and getting it down the road is key. So this is how we load our straw now. We put the bottom rows on edge, and you can just barely see up there in the corner how with the drop deck trailer and the 3x4 bales is essentially a flush top to the whole load. So the 3x4 works a lot better than the 3x3 because you don't have the loss of the drop deck. I mean, you might as well use a flatbed if you're using the 3x3 bales. In 1998, we toyed with walking floor trailers. At that time, we were shipping more hay to Alabama and Mississippi, Louisiana, and then we could backhaul cottonseed or other feed material back this way. And these are really, really great trailers and really work really well. They're a little heavier. The other problem is, as you walk the product forward, there is a point where you can walk it too far. And as one trailer salesman told me, there's some people that just aren't smart enough to run one of these trailers. So what we did is, you can't see it here, but all the way at the front again, without a camera phone 20 years ago, we put a little window up at the front, right where we could see where the hay was coming up and would meet the slope plate on the front of the walking floor trailer. Because obviously, if you're familiar with it, the trailers, the slats move about 10 to 12 inches, and they've got to go somewhere, to get another bite. So there's a slope plate in the front that hides the very front of those slats. And we put little windows up in the front and neoprene or siliconed around them so we keep the moisture out. But that allowed us to see when the hay was getting close to the front before we caused any damage. These trailers also allowed me to make deliveries to places where there wasn't anybody around. I didn't have to run their equipment. I could just, open the back doors, and when the bales come out, like the 3 that are coming down now would probably roll over, and then after that, if you just have a little down pressure on your brakes on the truck, they'll just sort of push it ahead, and they'll basically just stack up as it comes out. When I get into a conversation with a potential buyer, I always ask them, what have they got to handle well, first of all, I ask them if I can get into their place with my semi. And, are there any low bridges or light bridges or anything along those lines, anything that could be a detriment. I also ask them what they're going to use to unload the hay with. Are they going to use an unloader or a tractor unloader? They have a round bale fork, if they're just making the transition over to big square bales, or what they're using, or just how things are going to work out, because nobody likes a surprise, and you always try to cover those up ahead of time. And the question always comes up when we're in the conversation, and when I'm trying to sell some tested hay, they say, well, if the hay doesn't test what you say it does, will you give me my money back? I said, absolutely. And I said, at the same time, if it tests better than what I'm telling you it does, you're going to pay me more, right? And there's always that pregnant pause there that, well, they never thought of that. But there's, forage testing is not an exact science. And, we everybody tests forages or whatever to try to predict animal performance. And there's a big variation on how the sample is taken and how the protocols of how you maintain that sample until you get the results back. Not all my hay is marketed in big square bales, probably 90 to 95% of it. We've got a couple different options, as you see there. We've got the 3 by 4 bay, then a small square, and then a smaller square, and then a much smaller square. So we've had at times 3 of these small square balers. My wife got sort of anxious when I had 3 big square balers. She wanted 3 small balers. So you got to do what you got to do. And in my experiences with in forages and hay over the last 35, 45 years, I run into some very interesting people. I had to be interviewed by Max Armstrong when I was inducted into the Prairie Farmer Master Farmer program in Illinois in 2011. And then also got to rub elbows with Orion Samuelson when I was president of NHA. He was our keynote speaker at our conference in Chicago. Looking toward the future, I think Josh covered a couple things that we're coming up with. Is when I started in the hay and straw business, there wasn't hay testing. We didn't have that back in the early 80s. Preservatives were just coming out. Now there's different modes of either lactobacillus or propionic, whichever you want to do. So those advances have made, changes have made. And of course, now the electronics and stuff that you put on balers to where it applies propionic acid or whatever according to the moisture as it goes through the baler. Now, the only problem I have with that is that a lot of the testers, the sensors are toward the back by the knotters, and the application of the preservative is at the front. So we've got to close that window a little bit. But the other thing is, if you have a hand moisture tester, the more you probe bales with that, the higher the moisture is going to be. And it's not a matter of the tester. It's just a matter that the friction as you go in and out of the bales. Before you start, if it reads your temperature is approximately 75, probe 10 bales, pull it out, look at it. The temperature outside hasn't changed, but the tip of that tester has probably gone up to 95 to 100 degrees. So how do you know whether that hay is warm inside or not? That's one issue I've got. So if there's any other electronic engineers that want a project, there you go. The other thing that's creating some more opportunities for us is cover crops. This just happens to be a shot at a field day where they were going to seed some cover crops. But to keep cover on the ground on ground that's not already into a hay stand or whatever, there's a lot of opportunities to go out in the spring and bale those cover crops off for increased opportunities, if you will. So I guess if that's it, that's all I've got.
Are there any opportunities, do you think, for developing an export market from the middle of the United States, most of that currently on the West Coast?
There's some on the East Coast as well. Again, we've had discussions about shipping stuff out of the port of Chicago and up through that way. I haven't gotten that far with very much of it. I'd say there's opportunities, but of course, here in the Midwest, the issues are weather. Where out west they they control the moisture a lot better than what we can. But we can make a comparable product in the Midwest if we get the weather. In 2011, I had an entry that placed second in the Dairy Forage Super Bowl up in Madison, Wisconsin, and out of 200 entries, I was proud of that. And the last 3 years, I placed in the top 20 every year. So we can compete with the product. The cost standpoint of getting it shipped out of here and out the St. Louis Seaway, it's another issue.
So in western Kentucky, could it possibly go down the Mississippi River?
I'm sure it could. Yeah.
And how about replacing? I'm monopolizing.
That's right.
How about what are your feelings on high quality forage crop replacing row crops on a farm in western Kentucky or the midwestern United States?
The question was, how does hay potential replacing row crops in either western Kentucky or even upper Midwest, whatever. I'm biased, of course, but I think it does real well to replace row crops. The biggest thing I like about the hay business is I get to set the price myself. The Board of Trade doesn't. So if I can make a quality product, then I can get compensated for it. Is it? Yeah, the question was how high of a moisture would I consider baling using preservative on my big square balers? Yeah, 20 is pushing it. There's a lot of other factors involved. What's the chance of rain before it's going to get any drier? Do I have a market that might be able to use that right away if it does come in and get preservative and caramelizes but doesn't mold? Will somebody else be able to use that to in a TMR rash or whatever? And obviously it's not going to sell to the horse market, but it would be viable in the dairy market. It's been a while since I've played with the small square balers, moisture content in those, but I think you can probably go a little bit higher, say 22 to 25 with, make sure you get enough preservative on. I mean, I've baled some hay in that 20 to 22 range in the big square baler, where we were putting on 10 pounds per ton. So you got to balance it out. Do I put more preservative on and get the hay off the field? How long is it already laid there? Has it been already raked twice and another rain coming? There's obviously different factors involved, but in an ideal situation, whether it's if it's still prime dairy hay, but you got an opportunity to get it off the field before it rains, I lean that way. Because if you got to rake it the second time, it's never as good. Sir. There's a good friend of mine in Indiana that the question was about pelletizing or cubing as compared to what they do out west. And there's a good friend of mine in north of Indianapolis in Indiana that just put in a pellet mill, and he's going gangbusters with it. He's doing alfalfa. Well, excuse me, he's not doing alfalfa because he doesn't raise any hay. He's doing straw and corn stalks, and he said, he said right now the big R stores are looking at his product, and he's thinking it's going to go very well. He's got a little over $1 million invested in in that setup. So it's, yeah, yeah, bedding. And well, some of it's for feed too, because if you're aware, there's a lot of these dairies now are buying straw for their fiber source. They're sourcing a lot of their hay, out west, really high quality alfalfa, almost too high that they need fiber to balance that ration. So they're buying straw because it's more consistent as a fiber source to put into that ration for them. I mean, we're selling 4 to 5 loads of straw a week. They're going to dairies that are grinding it, putting it into TMR, and using it that way. And some of them are getting by with some lower quality straw. Some of them are still asking for really high quality straw, but they cringe when you tell them what the price is. Sure. Yep. I use the New Holland with the chevron rolls. I really like how they're aggressive enough to pull the hay through, and then it cracks the stem about every 2.5 to 3 inches, but it's not that aggressive that it doesn't knock the leaves off the stem. And we're trying to cut, as it was showed up here earlier, about every 28 days, 29, depending on the weather. Last year we had some second cutting that went about 10 days long because we didn't see a weather window to where we could get it upright. It was beautiful looking hay, but it only tested like 135 relative feed value. And we ended up selling it for some heifer hay, and the guy was really tickled with it. But I'm not sure he didn't feed some to his dairy cows just because it was a little cheaper. So, sure. How many days can I wait from the time I cut till I bale it? Tell me what the weather's going to be. Sunshine and wind. We ideally, the first cutting will probably have to wait 2 days. In other words, if we mow on Monday, we'll probably be baling on Thursday. And the later cuttings, second, third, fourth, and the second, third, and fourth cuttings will probably be, if we mow on Monday, we'll bale on Wednesday. Fifth cutting, when we get into the middle of September, we'll go back to that extra day of drying again. And I mean, as I mentioned earlier, with the big square baler, baling 80 to 100 acres a day of hay is not the problem. I don't like leaving that hay sit outside any night. So if you get it baled, you've gone through all that effort of getting a good product. I really like to get it on wheels and in the shed. I may not get it unloaded, but at least I get it under cover. And that's some of my restriction that I hold back. In other words, I got an 80-acre field of hay. Do I go ahead and just go out and mow it all and figure on doing it? I guess I'm getting lazy, but I'm doing it in 2 days now instead of 1. But just give me some more do it. The other thing is it lets me get that moisture down exactly where I want it, so I'm not baling stuff maybe just a tinge too wet, not using quite as much preservative, but getting it off the field and getting home a little earlier. Yes, sir. Usually when I'm only doing like 40 acres, just 2 trucks. Yeah. And sometimes I'll have to unload one, go back and get a little dab or something. But I've only got 1 truck and 2 trailers. So, yes, sir. No, sir. No, the question was, am I using a tedder, and if so, what kind? I have used a tedder. When I had a 12-foot hay bind, it worked well. But now I'm using a 15-foot disc bind, and the tedder won't quite reach out to the outside because, as I mentioned, I've got an 8-foot alleyway and then 2 8-foot windrows. So I've got to have something that's going to be 24 to 26 feet wide. And I think that you're going to lose a lot of leaves, and it does dry faster, but I haven't used one since 93, 94.
Your preservative rod helps you in that window where a header might would have helped dry a little faster. You've got the
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And I've got it reads out, as I mentioned, automatically with bale sensor, the star sensors up behind the knotters. So if the moisture varies a little bit, the preservative application varies a little bit as well.